This will be, sorry. Hi Roger, thanks for dropping by, duh. This will be quite a short orchid-y video for today. There's not a lot of new stuff opening, but there are a couple of things, and I just wanted to chat about things coming into the time of year. Time of year is now effectively, as far as our orchids are concerned, spring, and they're getting back into their comfort zone. We're bordering on 11-hour day lengths in the UK now, and that really is the serious trigger. Sort of 10 and a quarter to 10 and a half, there's a wake-up process going on, you know, where a lot of the tropical orchids are thinking, well, this is somewhere near what I like. But as soon as you get to that magic 11 hours and it starts increasing from that point, growth starts to spurt. So anything that's been growing a bit slowly should start to speed up. And the most important thing is to keep up with it. Because if growths start pushing on, either new growths or existing growths pushing on harder, then you need to get harder in the pot, yeah? To push all that stuff up needs some energy and things. So your watering and feeding frequencies, you need to start thinking about increasing the frequency. Perhaps going from very little feed to perhaps a bit more, yeah? The more the plant's actively growing, the more help it's going to need. It's as simple as that. It's a logical process, isn't it? You know. Anyway, new blooms. This little Cattleya, this is a new acquisition. This is opening. I wouldn't say it's opened yet, but it's trying hard. But at least we can see the colours now. Now this has got a tag about 8 foot long to get all the words on. Shin Fong, Little Sun, Young Min, Golden Boy. So it was reasonably obvious what colour or what relative colour it was going to be. And I'd seen a picture of it before I selected it anyway. But, you know, these are not going to be large Cattleya blooms, but they are opening with the deepest of orange. And it looks like they're going to have a slightly frilly lip that's a nice red inside, with an orange frill around the edge of the lip. So they're going to be attractive. And I think in future years, the fact that there's an element of young min in there, the spikes that it produces on the growths that I'll grow, rather than the ones I was given, are far more likely to have quite a few more blooms than that. The young min style Cattleyas, in the hybridization process, tend to have not enormous blooms, but they tend to have quite a lot of them. So this would probably be quite a poor blooming for this particular one. But I mean, you know, it got uprooted last year from where it grew, chucked in a box, sent over here, dug out of its pot, put in another one, you know. I mean, it's had, I won't say a harsh time, but it's had some disturbance in its life. And now, in the holy clay pot, it can settle down to a new life in this place, and with any luck, very soon start chucking up some new growths. You listening? Talking to you. Right, the beast of a nobile. I've just seen a problem on this plant. The chances are this plant will go to a show at some point. It's highly likely. And when I staked this up to make a nice even shape to it, I missed one. And it crosses over. It almost comes right round there. Well, it can't go like that. This needs to come round like there in that gap. In fact, I might even just push it into the middle of the plant now, and then it'll stay there, because the other canes will hold it in place. But I will need to strap it, because the buds are now bashing up against another cane. It needs to go about there. Yeah? It's an old cane, old leafless cane, and the old leafless canes I've tried to keep in the middle of the plant. Yeah, but they need to be evenly spaced to give all the buds a chance to spread out and make a good show. So I'll have to get that done a bit later, so mind I don't bash the buds off while I'm at it. And then all the new canes I arranged in like a semicircle around the outside, and I've deliberately kept that, well, it lives in that gap there, which means as far as light is concerned, its main light flow is coming straight in through that glass, which, bearing in mind, has had no shading all through the winter. So all the buds have turned to face that glass, and they've done it quite nicely. and I don't want to spoil that, so it's going back exactly where it's just come from once I've finished filming. And then the idea is that it will have a front face with all the blooms in the main facing the same way, and it will look a lot better like that as a show plant. So yeah, coming soon, but they're just opening. This happened over the weekend. They're not fully open yet, but they're starting. So you can see that they are a delicate yellow, deeper yellow in the centre, and a bit like my Spring Dream Apollon, they have lovely pink tips to the petals and sepals, and again on the lip. Give it another few days and that bunch will be open. These are going to follow very closely behind, as are these, and as the cane I was just mucking about with, and another one down here. And that's all the old canes that are in the main leafless. Yeah, so that's where those buds are coming from. All of last year's growths are the leaved canes. They're not going to drop their leaves till probably autumn or winter at the end of this year, because they have that sort of cycle with their leaves. And it's going to do a phased blooming. It's going to have a lot of blooms now, you know, within the next week. Most of these buds are going to be open, and that's a good show in itself, but that's not the show I'm after. The show I'm after is all these buds on the latest canes, last year's growths these are, because they're around the outside of the plant. And if they all face in the same direction, that's going to be pretty good. And they last long enough, I hope, that the ones that are opening centrally here will still be there in the main when these come out as well. But I'm starting to push this plant a bit harder now. The base of quite a few of the canes is swelling up. The new growths are going to start. The new roots have already started. So I'm going to start pushing this one a bit harder now, and get it going again, and then hopefully it'll do the same thing this year, another shed load of new growths ready for next year. And this year's blooming on last year's canes is going to use most of the nodes up, but it seems to have a habit of blooming quite close to the top of the cane but missing a couple of nodes off. And look what happens to them the following year. That's where it blooms the following year, on those couple that it missed out the year before. Yeah? So that means, you know, the older canes are still going to have some blooms in the gaps. And if you look at that cane, the blooming starts here and goes up to there. So those two nodes are spare at the top, and also so are some of these. So those may well bloom next time round. I mean, it might have a flush in the middle of the summer. They do funny things, nobiles, the hybrids, because they're a bit far away from the species nowadays. But yeah, I mean, this had, I suppose I could say it did actually have a formal rest this year, but it wasn't intentional, because all the previous years I've had it hasn't been rested properly, and it still bloomed fine like this. Now this year it unintentionally got a rest because it stayed in the grow room, and I dropped the temperature down this year. And as the temperature was right down, well, there's not a lot of point pouring water on it when it's not using it. It just needed a trickle now and again to keep it ticking over. But it did get that really bright light straight in through the glass. Any little bit of sunshine that came out during the winter, straight on the plant. That bright light, reduction in the temperature, mass blooming. Yeah, but accompanying that, the fact that the plant's not growing in the winter, it doesn't need much water, you know, just a trickle, just to stop the cane shriveling down a bit, and stop it becoming weaker by sort of literally starving it and shriveling it. So trickle of water now and again, no feed. Yeah, so it's a sort of rest, I suppose, but that's the closest that one's ever come to a formal, you know, dry, bright, cool winter rest sort of thing. That's about as near as I've ever got to it. And I don't think it's blooming any better this year than it did last year and the year before that. So the different treatment doesn't seem to be affecting it that much. But what I will say is this year there are more blooms, but they're not more blooms because of the treatment it's had. There are more blooms because there are more canes to bloom on. It's getting a bigger plant all the time. Now, treatment for this one, once these old leafless canes have bloomed on their last remaining nodes, those canes are of no use on a plant this big and this strong. Now, if this only had a couple of new growths last year, I'd still leave those older canes on to help support the plant. But this plant is now self-supporting. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 new canes last year. Well, that's a plant in itself with leaves that needs no backup support whatsoever if I chose to take all the old canes off, which I'm not doing at the moment. All the old canes that had no nodes left I did take off last autumn, so that I could arrange the canes that were left in a sensible form, knowing that, you know, this one will actually go in a show at some point. Not decided when yet. I think I left one on, thinking, oh, that one's not going to bloom again. Well, yes it is. It's managed to find a couple of places down the bottom to push some more buds out. I don't think it'll make a huge difference to a plant like this. But you can see, you know, that cane's had it. It's gone. It's long since gone. So I've got 3 or 4 canes to take off once it's finished blooming and all the new growths are pushing up. And then these latest canes this year, they're last year's growth, but what I call this year's canes as far as blooming is concerned. Once those central leafless canes are trimmed off down at the base, the middle of the plant becomes empty. I can then pull in those canes with all the leaves on nearer to the centre of the plant, so that the new growths come up round the edge again. And I'll just repeat that year in, year out. It's going to get bigger and bigger. Flipping thing. This is something you do need to consider. If something is growing well and doing well for you, it's going to get bigger. And it will take up more space. So as you're desperately trying to buy loads of orchids to fill up all your spaces and make it look nice, sometime down the line you're going to run out of space because your plants are getting bigger. And then you come to the point where you think, well, to get some decent airflow and some good light around the whole plant, something's going to have to go. Well, the easy way is to not fill it up in the first place, then you haven't got to start getting rid of stuff. Or you buy a new greenhouse, you know, or whatever, you know, I'm mucking about. But anyway, two little blooms opening today. Other things going on out here. I don't think that there are more buds coming in places, but I'd prefer to just wait till things open, really. What else am I going to change out here? There was some fundamental thing that will become a regular event. Oh yes, the Fisan 20 that arrived today. Thank you, John Greco, again. Reading up on that, algae in pots does no real harm. It looks awful, and if it gets to extremes, it may start suffocating some of the roots that are down that very outside edge of the pot. But apart from looking horrible, it doesn't really do any harm. So the need to get rid of it is not urgent in any shape or form. I have got 3 or 4 pots that are bad with it, really bad. And the simplest way is to just repot them and start again clean. You know, new media, clean pot, give the plant a good clean off while it's bare rooted, and start again with no algae. But what that Fisan 20 is really good at is preventative medicine, and prevention is always better than cure, or it is in my book. Yeah, wait till something gets bad and then try and fix it. It's best if you can stop it getting bad in the first place. And this stuff works really well as a preventative medicine. So something like once a month or whatever, you mix up a dilute solution, which I haven't worked out yet, the measurements I mean, trying to avoid gallons again. Let's stick to litres and millilitres and stuff. But it's a very weak solution, and you use it like a drench. You can either dunk your pot in it and let it soak for 5 or 10 minutes, and then put it somewhere and let it drain, and then give that pot a flipping good flush. And the Fisan 20 just kills the stuff that's in the pot, which will include the spores for the algae. if there are any beneficial bacteria in your pot, you can say bye-bye to them. So that depends on your viewpoint about what you're up to and how you grow. As far as I'm concerned, the only thing living in my pots should be the roots. Clean, pristine environment for the roots to grow in. And when those roots need water and feed, I give it to them. I don't want stuff breaking down in the pot and helping out. Thank you very much. So as a preventative medicine, it sounds pretty good stuff. But it is obvious that, you know, it needs to soak the whole pot for a while. So standing the pot in the stuff sounds like a good idea, and let it soak for a bit. Drain it off and then give it a really good flush out with clean water. That I would assume is pretty important, the flush mechanism afterwards. Clean it right out. And then you've just killed everything off in the pot, including any algae. And if it's a light bit of algae, not much there, it's not too bad. The downside of trying to kill algae in the pot is if you've got quite bad algae in your pot, you know, all green and slimy all around the edges, and you use the Physan 20 to kill it, you've just created a nasty toxic environment in your pot by killing the algae, because it's now dead. And that's going to do all sorts of things in your pot. Changes oxygen levels. You know, you've now got a pot full of decaying muck and gunk. Does that sound like a good idea? Well, it don't to me. So I'm not going down that road. But I do like this idea of a gentle treatment every now and again to stop the algae getting there in the first place. That seems to make much more sense to me. So I'm going to have a go at that eventually, when I get round to it and all that. This bush, I wanted to talk about that. We have found a bud here. That's definitely a bud. And it's so this is such a bush, I have to remember where things are on it. So there was one there that we were looking at, that's slowly developing, and then there was another one starting here. Well, eagle-eyed daughter had a look over this plant at the weekend and found at least another half a dozen nubbins that are starting to push. Now, I can't guarantee they'll all be buds. I haven't had the plant long enough to know it well enough. But there's another half a dozen or so lurking. I'm not going to try and find them now because they were hard work. But she loves doing that sort of thing. But there are other little nubbins starting. Now, some of those may be branches. You know, they may be doing this sort of thing in other places. And some may add to the bud count. But at the moment, we have a bud count of 2. And 2 is better than none. And at least I get to see these blooms firsthand because I've only ever seen pictures. So there we go. That's just a sort of quick, more orchidy type video for today. There isn't much else going on. The 2 plants that got the first at the show, the little twinkle and the bright orange cattleya over here, they were dressed for the show with the moss and everything, which seemed to work. That went down quite well. Quite a few people at the show that had plants in the show came up and said, "That moss done half look good, I think I might try that." So I'm waiting to see what the spring show looks like next year. We'll probably have a sea of green on the top of all the pots, because there's a lot of people liked it. They said it really sets the plant off. It makes it look like it's growing real and natural, which was the idea, so it worked. Strictly speaking, as far as an award is concerned, whether I'd put that moss on the top or just put some small bark on the top shouldn't have made any difference to the award. But how can you shut your mind off? You know, if you're the judge and you come over and you look at this plant, you look at that plant, you look at that plant, and you come to this plant, how can you shut your mind off and say, I'm not going to look at the moss, because that's not what I'm judging? You're just going to look at it, aren't you? So I think it's a nice little trick. And I have actually seen Orchid Society displays in other places where they've dressed the whole stage in moss and ferns. And the orchids look like they're growing out. You know, they put big branches and pieces of wood, and then they sort of strap the pots on so that the blooms are arranged nicely. And then after they've got everything in the right place, and they put the ferns in the gaps to fill the gaps up. Judges don't like gaps when they're looking at a whole display rather than individual plants. They like it nice and full and, you know, natural looking. And then they go around, dress the whole lot. You know, the logs, the branches, and there's green moss everywhere with ferns and orchids growing out of it. And quite honestly, it really, really, really does work. It looks brilliant. And especially if you've got like a backdrop. Most orchid displays have got a backdrop going up the back, which is normally black. Not always, but normally black. It's traditional. Well, again, if you've got some big, gnarly pieces of wood, you know, with some sort of mounted orchids growing out with quite a lot of moss on there, set against that black, oh, it really does look good. So all you people on show committees, get some moss. I'm going to go out round the forest later this year, and there'll be big holes where all the moss was, where everybody's been out nicking it. No, only joking. Repotting, that's what I wanted to mention. I got my 3 big sacks of Orchiata bark at the show on Saturday, so I now have stocks probably enough for 2 or 3 years. When I first got the Orchiata bark, it got used up at a rate of knots, simply because I wanted to transfer everything I had into it. So, you know, that was a massive repotting during that first year. Whereas this year, some things aren't going to need repotting either this year or even next year, especially things like the holy clay pots. So, yeah, I've got my bark now. I can start, get back to my notes, find out those at the top of the list, those that are not so urgent yet, and just progress through them slowly but surely until I've got everything done that I want to do this year. And some plants might get put back on the shelf because they're the sort of plant where if you muck about with them and disturb their roots before there's new roots growing, you may lose the old root system. So some may just wait for that nice, good point to repot when you see new roots growing. You can't go wrong if you stick to that point in an orchid's life. So yeah, I'm not watering anything today. That's probably it for today. I've got to do other things because I've got to try and retrieve my car from up the road somehow. Still haven't worked out how I'm going to do that, but anyway, I'll see you next time, and I'm going to try and think up a subject matter video for tomorrow, so like a specific subject rather than just me rambling on aimlessly like I do. So see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.